The hum of the helicopter blades above was deafening, but Clara Westbrook, sergeant and elite marksman, barely noticed. Her mind was focused solely on the mission ahead. She sat in the front of the Chinook, eyes scanning the landscape below as the team prepared for insertion. The rugged, jagged hills of eastern Afghanistan stretched out before them, treacherous, unforgiving, and the perfect backdrop for the operation they were about to undertake. Intel had been tight, the target clear. An insurgent leader named Jamil Qadir, responsible for a series of devastating attacks against coalition forces. Taking him down would cripple the enemy's operations in the region and give their side the upper hand. Clara and her team had been chosen for this mission for one reason: precision. They were specialists, trained to move silently, act quickly, and eliminate threats before anyone even knew they were there. The helicopter touched down with a thud, and the team jumped into action. The ground was rocky and uneven, but Clara's boots found solid footing as she moved toward their designated point. She nodded to her team, signaling them to set up a perimeter. The plan was simple. They would move through the valley under the cover of night, eliminate Qadir's guards, and extract the target. But as they advanced, something felt off. Clara's instincts, honed over years of training and combat experience, screamed that the area was too quiet. She adjusted her gear, checking the M82 sniper rifle slung over her shoulder. The air felt thick, the kind of stillness before a storm. A sudden crack of gunfire shattered the silence, and then the world erupted into chaos. Clara's heart skipped a beat as the first bullet whizzed past her ear, followed by a barrage of enemy fire from every direction. It was an ambush, an expertly orchestrated attack that seemed to come from nowhere. The team had been blindsided, caught in a narrow ravine with nowhere to run. "Contact left," one of the soldiers shouted, his voice sharp through the comms. Clara instinctively dropped to a knee and adjusted her rifle, searching the rocky outcroppings for movement. Her scope found a Targeta man, barely visible against the backdrop of the jagged terrain. She took the shot, and the man collapsed in a heap. But it wasn't enough. The enemy was everywhere on both sides, taking cover behind rocks, trees, and crumbling walls. Clara's squad returned fire, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. Every angle was covered, and the chances of a clean retreat were slipping away. "Fall back," came the command over the comms. But before Clara could move, she felt a searing pain in her left shoulder. She gasped, the sudden shock of the injury causing her grip to falter on her rifle. Blood poured from the wound, and her vision blurred for a moment. The pain was intense, but Clara fought it back. She was a Soldiera sniper and she had a job to do. She tightened her grip on the rifle, her pulse steadying as her focus narrowed. Through the haze of pain, she fired off another shot, dropping another enemy soldier. "Sergeant Westbrook, we need to move," someone yelled, but Clara barely heard them. The world around her seemed to slow, and the only thing that mattered was the target in her scope. But before she could fire again, the ground beneath her feet shook with the force of an explosion. The sound was deafening, metal twisting, rocks tumbling, and the air thick with smoke and dust. Clara was thrown off balance, her body slamming into the rough terrain. The shockwave lifted her off the ground, and for a moment, everything went black. When Clara regained consciousness, the battlefield was eerily quiet. Her head was pounding, and her body felt like it had been hit by a truck. She tried to move, but a sharp pain in her shoulder shot through her like a lightning bolt. She glanced down to see her uniform soaked in blood. The bullet had torn through muscle and bone, and the wound was deep. Through the smoke, Clara could see her team moving toward the extraction point. The helicopter was already circling overhead, ready to pick them up. But Clara's body felt heavy, her limbs unresponsive. She tried to push herself up, but the pain was too much. She looked around, her vision fading in and out. The enemy had pulled back for the moment, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. She couldn't let them find her. With a final, desperate effort, Clara attempted to crawl toward cover, but the pain in her shoulder overwhelmed her. Her vision blurred again, and she lost the strength to fight it. As her body gave in to the darkness, she heard the sound of the helicopter blades overhead fading away as her teammates were evacuated, leaving her behind. Alone, in the heart of enemy territory, Clara Westbrook lay motionless, her fate uncertain. Clara's eyelids fluttered open, the darkness pressing in around her like a suffocating weight. Her head throbbed, and every movement sent waves of excruciating pain coursing through her body. The stench of blood and dust filled her nostrils, mingling with the acrid smell of smoke from the explosion that had shattered everything. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Her mind struggled to latch on to something, anything, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. Her shoulders screamed at her with a fiery, relentless ache, the pain almost unbearable as she tried to move it. Her uniform was soaked with blood, the dark red staining the fabric, pooling beneath her in an unsettling warmth. The bullet had torn through muscle and bone, leaving a gaping wound that felt as though it was eating her from the inside. Every breath felt like it required more effort than she could afford, each inhale coming in shallow, rattling gasps. The battlefield around her was eerily silent, save for the distant sound of the wind blowing through the ravine. Clara's first thought was the squad team she'd been with only moments ago. The extraction was supposed to be imminent, they had to be coming for her, but as she lay there, half conscious, the weight of the silence settled in, and a cold fear gnawed at the edges of her mind. No helicopter blades overhead, no voices calling her name. The harsh reality of the situation slammed into her like a brick wall. She was alone, and she was still alive. Clara's survival instincts kicked in, overriding the overwhelming fatigue threatening to claim her. She pushed herself up, her right arm shaking from the effort, but the pain in her left shoulder was like a fire that would not be doused. A flash of panic surged through her, but she swallowed it down. She had been trained for moments like this, taught to survive when there was no hope left, no help on the way. Her life, as it had always been in combat, now depended entirely on her ability to stay alive, to remain hidden from the enemy. The ravine was a jagged, merciless landscape of broken stone and loose rocks. She could feel the sharp edges of the terrain beneath her as she crawled, her movements slow and deliberate. She was careful, testing each rock before shifting her weight, knowing that one wrong move could give her away. The sounds of the enemy searching, shouting to each other in the distance, kept her heart pounding in her chest. Their voices carried over the ravine, muffled by the wind, but she knew they were close. They had to be looking for her, no doubt they had seen her fall, and they wouldn't leave a survivor behind. She moved steadily, dragging her wounded body through the rubble, pushing herself farther into the shadows, into a small crevice she found in the rock wall. It was just big enough for her to curl into, just big enough for her to hide from the prying eyes of the enemy. She let out a slow breath, trying to stay quiet, trying to slow the frantic pace of her heart. Every second in the open made her more vulnerable. Every minute that passed without rescue made her chances of survival slimmer. Her body was weakening quickly. Blood loss, exhaustion, pain, they all fought to pull her under. Her eyelids drooped as the darkness threatened to consume her once again. She had to fight it. She had to stay awake, stay alert. But everything inside her screamed for rest. The cold stone beneath her was a harsh comfort, the rough edges pressing into her skin, reminding her that she was still alive. Time seemed to stretch on for hours, the night dragging its weight across her senses. The wind picked up, rustling the dry, dead leaves scattered across the ravine floor, and Clara could hear the faint sounds of the enemy still searching. She clutched her sidearm with the hand that still worked, keeping her grip tight despite the tremors racking her body. She needed to be ready. She couldn't let them get close enough to take her alive. She couldn't risk being captured. And then, as the coldness of the night grew deeper, a voice cut through the silence. It was soft at first, a low murmur of words she couldn't understand, but it was so clear in its chilling clarity that it stopped Clara's heart. The voice came from the ravine below, and though she couldn't make out the language, the intent behind it was unmistakable, a question, a demand for information. Is she still alive? Clara's pulse quickened, her body tensing as the words echoed in her mind. The voice was steady, calculated, the kind of voice a sniper would use, calm, unhurried, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who was not just a random fighter, but a trained professional. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to listen, trying to place the direction of the voice. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She wasn't alone. She was being watched. Clara lay in the crevice, her body pressed against the rough rock wall, her breath shallow, the pain in her shoulder almost unbearable. The bullet wound had stolen her strength, but she had learned long ago that survival wasn't about strength, it was about staying calm when everything in you screamed to panic. But the voice she had heard moments ago had shattered the quiet, chilling the air around her with an intensity she couldn't ignore. The words echoed in her mind. Is she still alive? The voice wasn't that of a common insurgent. It was calculated, too precise. Clara's heart skipped a beat, and she fought the urge to react. The sniper had been tracking her since she was separated from her team. Hassan, the ghost of the mountains. Rumored to be one of the deadliest marksmen in the region, Hassan's reputation was enough to make even the most hardened soldiers pause. They called him a phantom, someone who could move across the battlefield without leaving a trace, a man whose presence was barely a whisper in the wind. Clara's mind raced. Hassan was already closing in, moving in for the kill. She could feel it, the air around her seemed to thicken, the silence stretching out in front of her like the inevitable. He had claimed the lives of several soldiers already, his shots precise, lethal, delivered with the calmness of someone who had done this too many times to count. He wasn't just an enemy sniper. He was a predator, and she was his prey. Her thoughts swirled, and Clara tried to focus. Hassan was close now, closer than she had anticipated. The wind had shifted, picking up slightly, the dust swirling through the ravine, catching in her mouth. Her heart pounded harder in her chest, but she couldn't let that show. A small tremor of pain ran through her left arm, but she forced herself to keep still, to not even flinch. Years of sniper school, of waiting, of being patient in the face of impending death, all of it had prepared her for moments like this. She had to remain as still as possible, using every ounce of training to stay out of Hassan's line of sight. The slightest movement, the smallest sound, and he would end her life before she even saw him. The sun was starting to dip lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield. It made it harder to spot him, but it also worked in Clara's favor. The fading light could conceal her just enough to stay hidden, just enough to give her a fighting chance. She could hear the soft scrape of gravel as Hassan shifted in the distance, his boots brushing against the earth with barely a sound. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to act, but she had to wait. If she exposed herself too soon, it would be over. Time stretched, each second an eternity. Clara's mind raced through every option. There were no backup forces coming, no helicopters would swoop down to save her now. She had only one chance, and it was slipping away as the seconds dragged on. Hassan was too close. If he aimed his rifle at her now, there would be no escaping the shot. She could feel his gaze on her, even though she couldn't see him. He was close enough that she could sense his every move, every breath, every moment he hesitated. He was giving her a chance, but for how long? Suddenly, the distinct sound of a rifle being adjusted reached her ears, and Clara froze. Hassan was taking his time, lining up the shot. The anticipation was unbearable. Her hand gripped the hilt of her sidearm, her fingers slick with sweat, but she couldn't afford to reveal herself. Not yet. A breeze swept through the ravine, rustling the leaves, and Clara knew this was her moment. Hassan's attention had shifted for just a fraction of a second. She couldn't waste it. Summoning every last ounce of strength, Clara rolled silently from her hiding spot, shifting her body into a firing position before Hassan could adjust to her movement. Her heart thundered in her chest as she raised her rifle, her fingers trembling on the trigger. She didn't aim. She couldn't afford to. With a sharp breath, she fired. The shot rang out across the ravine, the sound a deafening crack in the stillness. For a moment, Clara's world went silent again, the ringing in her ears drowning everything else out. She couldn't see where the bullet landed, but she knew she had taken the shot. It wasn't a clean kill, not by any means. But it was enough to give her a chance. The sniper would now know she wasn't the easy target he had assumed. He would know she had fought back, and Clara wasn't about to let this be her end. As the dust settled, Clara shifted, her gaze darting to the place where she had heard the rifle shift just moments ago. She couldn't see him yet, but she could feel him. And for the first time in hours, Clara didn't feel so alone. The sound of the shot reverberated in Clara's head like a drumbeat, the echo still ringing in her ears as the dust settled around her. The sniper's position was still a mystery she had missed, but the shot had done its job. The faint crack of gunfire, though aimed at Hassan, had served as a warning, an announcement that she was still alive, still a threat. The seconds stretched on. Clara's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay as still as possible, not daring to move, not even to blink. She could feel him, though she couldn't see him. The sniper Hassan was there, somewhere in the dark, his presence like a storm on the horizon. Her breath caught in her chest when she heard it, the faint rustle of movement, the deliberate cadence of boots against the ground. Hassan wasn't making a rush toward her. He wasn't sprinting to finish the job. Instead, he moved slowly, carefully, as though assessing her, understanding her every move. Clara's thoughts raced. He had tracked her here, had watched her for longer than she realized. He had seen the desperation in her eyes, the resolve in her stance. But what now? What would happen when he reached her? A voice broke the silence, so close now it made Clara's blood run cold. "Come with me," Hassan said, his tone flat. But there was something else there, something like curiosity, or perhaps even respect. He continued, his voice almost a whisper, "Or I'll put you down right here." The ultimatum hung in the air, oppressive and final. Clara's pulse spiked, her instincts urging her to reach for her weapon, to fight until her last breath. But as the adrenaline coursed through her, Clara realized something crucial: she had no choice. She couldn't fight him. Not now, not like this. Hassan had her cornered, and if she didn't take his offer, if she didn't do what he said, he would kill her without hesitation. With a deep, steadying breath, Clara slowly lowered her sidearm, her fingers trembling. She had been taught to never give in, to never show weakness, but she had learned another lesson long ago. Survival was more important than pride. She couldn't die here. Not like this. Not with no one around to remember her. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice rough, betraying none of the fear that churned inside her. She knew he was watching her, waiting for her to flinch, for any sign of hesitation. But she didn't give him the satisfaction. For a long moment, Hassan didn't move. Clara could feel his eyes on her, as though he was trying to gauge her every emotion, her every thought. Then, with a grunt, he reached into the shadows, his strong hands grabbing hold of her and pulling her from the crevice. The world spun as he dragged her roughly through the dirt, her wound protesting with every painful tug. Clara bit back a groan, clenching her teeth against the agony that flared in her shoulder. It felt like every movement was a battle she couldn't win, but she forced herself to focus, to stay sharp. Her survival depended on it. They moved deeper into the darkness, away from the ravine, into the heart of enemy territory. Every step Clara took was slower than the last. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew she had to keep her wits about her. If there was any chance of escape, of survival, she had to wait for the right moment. She couldn't afford to trust Hassan completely, not yet. But as they walked, Clara began to notice something strange. Hassan wasn't rushing her. He wasn't being cruel or violent. Instead, he seemed thoughtful, almost hesitant. He moved her carefully through the shadows, avoiding detection, making sure no one else saw them. It wasn't the behavior of someone who had planned to kill her. Once they reached a small, hidden alcove, Hassan finally stopped, his grip loosening around Clara's arm. She barely had time to react before he crouched beside her, his sharp eyes scanning the area one last time to ensure they were alone. Then, he did something Clara never expected. He reached into his pack and pulled out a field dressing, carefully unwrapping it. Clara tensed, her instincts screaming at her to pull away, to fight him off. But Hassan's actions were deliberate, calm, almost gentle as he cleaned her wound, pressing the gauze against her bloodied shoulder. His touch was precise, professional. It didn't feel like the work of an enemy sniper. It felt like the work of someone who had done this many times before. Clara watched him, her mind racing. He was tending to her wound, something she had never expected. He wasn't just an enemy sniper anymore. In this moment, he was the only one who could keep her alive. The realization hit her with a gut-wrenching clarity. Hassan wasn't just playing a game with her. He was offering something an uneasy alliance, a shared survival. Her thoughts were a blur. Was this some sort of trick? Was Hassan simply buying time, waiting for the perfect moment to kill her, or was he actually trying to save her? She couldn't trust him fully, not yet. But for the first time in hours, Clara realized that she might not have a choice. She had no weapon, no radio, no backup. And if Hassan was the only one who could help her escape this nightmare, she would have to make a decision. As he finished dressing the wound, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. Clara had one chance. She could trust him, or she could fight and die alone. But for now, she chose to survive.